She was treated as a mere pastime by a cruel businessman, but when she reappears with 3 beautiful babies, he is shocked. The big twist is that his family's entire destiny and fortune changes forever, and what seemed like public humiliation transforms into her greatest victory. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Ashley stood in the hospital's cramped billing office, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the clerk's impatient sighs echoing in her ears. The day had already stretched her thin, and now she was learning that her mother's treatment costs were about to double. She pressed her palms onto the counter as though by sheer force she could negotiate mercy, but the expression on the clerk's face told her there was no room for bargaining. Bills had to be paid, and soon. No amount of polite conversation or pleading would soften that blow. She forced a tight smile and promised to return with payment, although deep down she had no idea where the money would come from. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. Ashley clutched her thin jacket closer and tried to brush off the sense of despair that was creeping over her. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through job listings for the 100th time that week. Each position demanded skills or credentials she didn't quite have, or they paid so little that even with overtime it wouldn't cover her mother's medication, let alone the overdue bills. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Tanya, her best friend since high school. Tanya's voice spilled through the speaker, bright and insistent. "I've got something that might help." She explained that there was a high-end event taking place that evening, some exclusive business gala. The idea of dressing up for a fancy gathering felt absurd to Ashley, given her current predicament, but Tanya insisted it could be an opportunity to meet potential employers, or even land a conversation with someone who could help her financially. There was a pause on Ashley's end. She had never been comfortable in those circles, but desperation outweighed her reservations. Hours later, Ashley found herself stepping out of a rideshare car in front of a grand venue she had only ever seen in society magazines. Gleaming luxury cars rolled past, each occupant dressed to impress. Her own second-hand cocktail dress felt a size too tight, but it was the best she could manage. She walked toward the entrance, hearing faint music from inside and catching glimpses of chandelier light reflecting off sleek marble floors. Butterflies swarmed in her stomach as she crossed the threshold. The interior was even more extravagant. The foyer buzzed with chatter, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the faint spice of catered hors d'oeuvres. Ashley scanned the crowd, searching for Tanya in the sea of coiffed hair and tailored suits. Before she could locate her friend, she spotted a man who seemed to command the space with minimal effort. He stood tall, wearing a sharp suit that fit like it had been sewn onto him. She realized this man had the posture and confidence that spoke of both wealth and power. She had heard whispers of his name before. Travis, a young but already legendary entrepreneur whose reputation for ruthlessness was almost as famous as his staggering success. Ashley tried not to stare, but something about him caught her attention. He appeared to be in the midst of intense conversation with a group of colleagues, occasionally glancing around the room as if assessing everything and everyone. For a split second, his eyes flickered her way, and there was a moment of hesitant curiosity in his gaze. Then, just as quickly, the moment passed. Tanya appeared at Ashley's side, excitement sparking in her eyes. "I'm so glad you came." Tanya took Ashley's elbow and guided her toward the main hall. They wove through the crowd until they reached a corner table scattered with brochures and business cards. Tanya explained they should mingle, drop Ashley's resume with a few key people, and hopefully secure an interview. Ashley's heartbeat thumped, but she nodded and mustered a polite smile. Their plan hit an abrupt detour when a mutual acquaintance approached with Travis in tow, clearly eager to play matchmaker. The acquaintance beamed while introducing them, rattling off Travis's accolades and then giving Ashley a once-over that made her feel small. Travis was polite, offering his hand and a tight-lipped smile. She introduced herself softly, trying to speak confidently but feeling her voice falter as she looked into his calculating eyes. At first, the conversation was stiff and formal, but then a small spark flickered. He asked about her interests, and she mentioned her concern for healthcare accessibility, taking a chance to casually reference her mother's situation. Surprisingly, he seemed intrigued, leaning in and asking questions about the local hospital system. For a moment, Ashley felt a pang of hope. Perhaps she could interest him in helping or at least guide her to someone who could. She started to explain that she was looking for better job opportunities to support her mother's treatments when a woman nearby whispered something into Travis's ear. He paused, his expression shifting. His warm curiosity froze over. He gave a quick glance at Ashley's dress, then her shoes, and something hardened in his eyes. Ashley sensed a change in his demeanor, though she didn't understand why. Suddenly, Travis made a cutting remark about people who only show up at events like these to fish for wealthy benefactors, clearly including Ashley in that category. The dig sliced through her. She tried to respond calmly, but her cheeks flamed with embarrassment. A few of his associates snickered, covering their smug smiles with champagne flutes. She felt her throat tighten, anger and shame warping her thoughts. "I'm not here to beg," she managed to say, voice trembling. The onlookers seemed to hang on her every word, some amused, others merely curious. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Tanya stepping forward, alarmed at the direction the conversation was taking. Travis merely shrugged, raising a brow as if he'd just proven his point. The easy courtesy he showed moments ago had vanished. "Well," he said, his voice cool, "you wouldn't be the first to try." Tanya intervened, trying to lighten the mood, but the damage was done. Ashley's pride was in shreds, laid bare for everyone to see. She tried to salvage some dignity, quickly explaining she was there on a friend's advice, not to panhandle. Even as she spoke, she could tell no one was listening. The circle of onlookers had grown, capturing the drama unfolding like it was the evening's entertainment. Every second that passed felt heavier, until Ashley's voice caught in her throat. With trembling hands, she grabbed her purse and stepped away. Tanya followed, attempting to calm her, but Ashley couldn't bear it any longer. She could still sense Travis's eyes on her, along with the pitying or judgmental glances of the crowd. She felt tears threatening to slip free, and she refused to let them fall in that place. Once outside, the cool air of the evening wrapped around her like a lifeline. She moved quickly across the pavement, scanning for a taxi or rideshare to take her far from this mortifying scene. Tanya caught up and placed a reassuring hand on Ashley's shoulder, guiding her into her small car parked nearby. As Ashley settled into the passenger seat, the reality of her financial burdens and her mother's deteriorating health magnified tenfold. All she had hoped for tonight was a glimmer of possibility, but instead, she was left feeling humiliated and more desperate than before. Tanya glanced over, worry etched in her face. "He's just another arrogant rich guy. Don't take it to heart," she said, softly patting Ashley's hand. Ashley appreciated the words, but they provided little comfort. She stared out the window at the passing streetlights, her mind looping over the brief spark she'd sensed with Travis before it soured, the unkind laughter, and his blunt dismissal. She felt a sudden wave of fatigue roll over her, heavier than anything she'd felt before. Perhaps it was the crushing disappointment, or maybe a buildup of worry that had been gnawing at her for weeks. Tanya tried to engage her in light conversation, but Ashley could hardly respond, as if her energy was draining by the second. The city lights streaked by outside, giving way to quieter roads that led closer to her small apartment. On the ride home, Ashley feels a wave of dizziness. A sudden chill runs through her. Something is off. She silently wonders if the night's stress has pushed her body beyond its limit, sensing a deeper problem ahead. Ashley woke up the next morning feeling as though someone had placed a vice around her head. A swirl of nausea and a dull throb behind her eyes made even the simple act of sitting up feel monumental. She rubbed her temples, replaying the awful scene from the gala, Travis's cutting remarks, the stifled laughter, her own strangled voice trying to defend herself. The memory came in jagged flashes. She pushed it away, willing her mind to focus on the day ahead. Bills needed paying, her mother's condition weighed heavily on her, and there was no space for self-pity. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She fumbled for it, squinting at the harsh glow of the screen. It was Tanya texting her a simple, "You good?" followed by a few heart emojis. That small gesture of care momentarily eased the tension in her chest. She typed back a quick reply. "Headache, but I'll manage. Hospital run later. Talk soon." The nausea, however, refused to let up. She padded into the cramped bathroom of her apartment, splashed cold water on her face, and tried to steady her breathing. Her heart hammered in her chest for no apparent reason, and a wave of panic rose. She glared at her reflection in the mirror, silently commanding herself to push through. There was no time to feel weak. She got dressed in a hurry, pulling on a simple blouse and a pair of worn-out jeans, then snatched up her purse. The plan was to drop by the hospital to check on her mother before hitting the streets to continue her job search. She'd already lined up a few possible places to hand out resumes: an office receptionist gig, a bookstore clerk position, and a cafe that might need a part-time barista. None would solve her massive debt, but at least she could bring in a little extra for medical bills. At the hospital, the sterile smell pricked her nose as she walked down the hallway. A nurse who recognized her from previous visits offered a sympathetic nod. Ashley's stomach churned more violently here than at home, as though her worries multiplied in every corner of this building. She reached her mother's room, finding her dozing under thin blankets. Machines beeped steadily, and an IV bag dripped a slow rhythm. Ashley pulled up a chair and watched her mother's shallow breathing. It struck her how much she relied on seeing her mother's chest rise and fall to remind herself everything was still okay, at least for now. A few minutes later, a doctor entered with a somber air, flipping through a chart. He informed Ashley that her mother's treatment needed to be intensified, which meant additional medication and possibly more extended hospital stays. The cost would rise yet again. The mention of money felt like a fresh punch to the gut, though she nodded calmly, pretending she could handle it. She thanked the doctor and softly murmured to her sleeping mother that she'd find a way through. Leaving the hospital felt like stepping off a ledge with no safety net below. Her mind raced with dread over how fast the bills were piling up. She had to find income, anything to help her mother. Outside, a stiff breeze whipped her hair around, and she pulled her jacket closer to keep from shivering. She tried to quell the nagging throbbing in her stomach by taking deep breaths and focusing on each step forward. Despite feeling queasy, Ashley began her job hunt in earnest. The first spot was a modest office building with a cracked "Help Wanted" sign taped to the door. She walked in to find a small waiting area and a receptionist with a frosty smile. Ashley politely asked for an application, only to be told the position had just been filled. Her shoulders sagged, but she forced a thank you and left. On her way to the next place, her phone buzzed. It was Tanya, wanting updates. Ashley answered, describing her morning in a subdued tone. Tanya's voice grew concerned. "You sound off. Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," Ashley insisted, though her stomach clenched with another wave of uneasy dizziness. "It's just stress." Tanya didn't sound convinced but let it go, telling Ashley to call if she needed help. They hung up, and Ashley trudged on. The second stop was a bookstore that smelled pleasantly of paper and coffee. A small hope kindled in her. She loved the idea of working somewhere cozy and calm. But the manager took one look at her limited retail experience and apologized, saying they needed someone who could work overtime and weekends. She could barely handle part-time with her mother's situation. The pang of disappointment settled in again. By the time she reached the cafe that might need a barista, her legs felt wobbly, and she was sweating despite the mild weather. Stepping inside, she tried to collect herself. The menu boards blurred momentarily, and a sweet smell of pastries overwhelmed her senses. She took a shaky breath and approached the counter, starting to ask about the position. Before she could finish her sentence, her vision narrowed, and the floor tilted. She collapsed in a heap, the sound of startled shouts echoing around her. It felt like a dream, everything happening in slow motion. One moment, she was standing, trying to form words. The next, she was on her knees, staring at shiny tiles that flickered in and out of focus. Strangers hurried to her side. A kind-faced woman grabbed her arm, gently propping her against the counter. Someone else tapped numbers into a phone, calling for help. Ashley's world spun again, and she blacked out. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on a gurney in what looked like the back of an ambulance. A paramedic with a gentle voice asked if she could hear him. She nodded weakly, confusion swirling in her head. He checked her vitals, instructing her to stay still. Fear crept in. Her mother was the one needing medical attention, not her. But she felt too weak to protest. The next thing she knew, she was in a small clinic room, the walls a calming shade of pale green. Tanya burst through the door, relief washing over her face when she saw Ashley awake. She placed a trembling hand on Ashley's shoulder. "You scared me," Tanya said, eyes moist. "I came as soon as I heard." Ashley tried to sit up, but dizziness forced her back against the pillows. She let out a shallow laugh. "I'm fine. Honestly, I just need to go home and rest." But even as she said it, she knew something deeper was wrong. A doctor entered, tapping a file in his hand. He looked earnest, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that made Ashley's stomach knot. "We've run a few initial tests," he began. "Nothing definitive yet, but we have some indications." Her pulse pounded as she waited for him to continue, breath catching in her throat. Tanya gripped her hand reassuringly. The doctor explained that based on her symptoms and the basic tests, there was a strong chance she was pregnant, and they needed to do more specific checks to confirm. The word pregnant echoed in her mind like a gunshot. She blinked, searching for words, but they clung to the back of her throat. Pregnancy hadn't even crossed her mind. She was consumed with taking care of her mother, finding a job, paying the bills. The idea that she might be carrying a child felt impossible. And yet, as her thoughts swirled, one face surfaced. Travis. Her cheeks burned with a complicated mix of shame, anger, and disbelief. She tried to muster a response. That can't be right. No. The denial sprung out of her like a reflex, almost mechanical, as though stating it aloud would make it untrue. Tanya looked at her with worry, eyes scanning her expression. The doctor explained that they'd do a follow-up test soon. In the meantime, he urged her to rest and avoid stress. Ashley nodded stiffly, sinking back against the pillow with her heart hammering. Stress avoidance felt like a cruel joke. Her entire life was drowning in it. As they waited, Tanya squeezed her hand. "Hey," she whispered gently. "No matter what, I'm here for you. But if this is true, you need to think about telling him." Hearing Travis's name implied so directly made Ashley flinch. She closed her eyes, waves of conflicting emotions rolling through her. Could she even bring herself to face him again after how he humiliated her? Yet a small voice in her mind reminded her that any child had the right to know their father. She pressed her free hand to her forehead, swallowing hard. The test results came back soon after. A new doctor arrived, confirming that Ashley was indeed pregnant. Tanya offered a nervous smile of solidarity, but Ashley felt as though the floor had shifted under her feet. It wasn't necessarily good news or bad news, just enormous news. The reality hit her like a rush of cold air. She was going to be a mother, and her life was about to change in ways she hadn't dreamed possible. They left the clinic together. Tanya insisted on driving Ashley home, fussing over her like a protective older sister. Ashley was too stunned to argue. As the city streets passed by in a blur, the weight of the situation pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. Her mind flickered back to Travis, remembering the anger in his voice and the dismissive way he'd looked at her. Even if she wanted to ignore his role in this pregnancy, she knew deep down that denying it wouldn't make him vanish from her thoughts. Outside her apartment building, the late afternoon sun slanted across the sidewalk, creating long shadows. Ashley stared at the chipped paint on her front door, 1,000 worries swirling in her mind. Her mother's bills, a baby on the way, her abysmal financial state, and Travis's icy gaze. Tanya gently touched her shoulder, sensing how overwhelmed she felt. "It's a lot," Tanya said softly, "but you'll figure it out, one step at a time." Ashley nodded, summoning what little courage she had. A quiet determination settled over her. She wouldn't let fear paralyze her. No matter how daunting, she would find a way to protect her mother, herself, and now this unborn life growing inside her. She promised Tanya she'd schedule a proper prenatal appointment soon, then gave her friend a hug before stepping inside the dim warmth of her apartment. She dropped her keys on the small table by the door and leaned against the wall, taking in the silence. Her phone vibrated in her purse and she pulled it out, expecting Tanya's usual follow-up text. Instead, her eyes widened at the unknown number flashing on the screen. A single message popped up. "I know about Travis. We need to talk." Her heart pounded as she wondered who's behind it and what it might mean for her newly complicated life. Ashley stared at the unknown text on her phone screen, her pulse quickening. She still felt shaken from learning she was pregnant, and now this mysterious message seemed to prove that the turmoil surrounding Travis was far from over. The text read, "I work for him. I saw what happened at the gala. You deserve better. He'll be at the Westvale Corporate Tower tomorrow, 11 a.m. Confusion and curiosity battled inside her. Who would risk contacting her like this? Why did they even care? She reread the message several times before finally setting her phone aside, her mind whirling with possibilities. All night, she tossed and turned, haunted by the humiliation at the gala and the moment she discovered she was carrying Travis's child. Early morning brought little relief. She woke up feeling an odd mixture of dread and determination. If Travis was going to be at the corporate tower, maybe she could at least try to have a real conversation with him, one that didn't end in her being mocked or brushed aside. She hated how the mere mention of his name made her entire body tense. Yet she couldn't ignore that he had a right to know about the baby, no matter how much resentment and anxiety filled her heart. She texted Tanya, giving her a brief rundown of the situation and the note about where Travis would be. Within minutes, Tanya called, sounding more alarmed than Ashley had expected. "That's risky," Tanya warned, her voice coming through with a mix of protective concern and frustration. "Don't forget how he humiliated you last time. And remember, you're still recovering from your collapse. Think about the stress." Ashley pressed her phone to her ear, pacing the length of her small living room. "I know," she said softly, "but we're talking about my future, my mother's medical bills, and now this baby. I can't keep running." Tanya, unable to fully argue with that, reluctantly gave her blessing, urging Ashley to at least try to stay calm and avoid another scene that could go viral on social media. By mid-morning, Ashley found herself riding an elevator that seemed to climb forever, each floor making her stomach twist tighter. The Westvale Corporate Tower was sleek and modern, all glass and chrome. She felt painfully out of place in her simple blouse and slacks. Tugging at a loose thread on her sleeve, she tried to steady her breath. Why was she so nervous? She reminded herself of the baby and how this wasn't just about her humiliation anymore. It was about securing some form of truth or support, whichever came first. Stepping into the lobby on the 35th floor, she was greeted by the sight of business people hurrying past, their steps clicking on polished marble floors. At the far end of the expansive space, dark-suited men and women gathered around a reception desk adorned with the company's sleek logo. She scanned their faces, her heart thudding. Finally, she spotted Travis standing with a small group, discussing something that seemed urgent. His posture was as self-assured as ever, his voice carrying a hint of authority that commanded people's attention. She took a deep breath and moved closer. With each step, the memory of his dismissive remarks at the gala roiled inside her, triggering a fierce swirl of anger and anxiety. But she kept her chin up, refusing to give in to the tide of intimidation pressing at her thoughts. If she was going to speak to him, she needed every ounce of composure she could muster. Suddenly, an imposing security guard, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped in her path. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice clipped and formal. "I'm here to see Travis," Ashley replied, matching his seriousness. "It's personal. Urgent." The guard raised an eyebrow and took a moment to survey her appearance. It was a look she knew well, the quick once-over that measured whether someone belonged. "This area is restricted," he said. "We're hosting a private function. Do you have an appointment?" Ashley's heart rate spiked. She was pretty sure no one had put her name on any approved list. Summoning her courage, she attempted to skirt around him. "I don't need an appointment," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just need 2 minutes of his time." The guard's hand shot out, lightly gripping her elbow to guide her back. "Sorry, ma'am. That's not how it works here." A prickle of defiance flared inside her. She thought about her hospital bills, about that tiny heartbeat inside her, and decided she wouldn't be brushed off. "I have every right to speak to him," she insisted, voice rising. "This is about his personal responsibilities." But the guard cut her off, stepping forward to block her. "You need to leave," he said, more firmly now. Her frustration spilled over. "If he won't come to me, then I'll keep raising my voice until he hears it," she snapped. A few heads turned. Business types paused in mid-conversation to watch the unfolding altercation. Embarrassment flashed through Ashley, but it only fanned the flames of her resolve. She wouldn't let herself be silenced again. The guard's stance turned confrontational, and Ashley found herself locked in a staring contest with him. "Miss, step away before I have to escort you out," he warned. "Do you really want to cause a scene?" she retorted, though her knees trembled. Travis's entire reputation might be on the line if the public found out he's refusing to acknowledge. She stopped mid-sentence because, out of the corner of her eye, she saw Travis glance in their direction. For a moment, his expression was blank, as though he was trying to place her face. Then, recognition dawned, followed by a flicker of annoyance. He murmured something to the people around him and made his way across the lobby, his gaze never leaving Ashley. The guard stepped aside immediately when Travis arrived, as though acknowledging a higher authority. Travis's face was carefully neutral, but she could sense tension in his shoulders. "You again," he said, keeping his voice low. His group lingered a few steps behind, obviously curious about this unexpected intrusion. Ashley fought the impulse to wilt under his scrutiny. "Yes, me again," she shot back, determined to maintain eye contact. "This time, I'm not leaving until we have a real conversation." Travis glanced around at the onlookers, clearly aware that any spectacle could hurt his image. "We can step into a private office if you'd like," he said pointedly, "but if you think you can just barge in here, you're mistaken." Her chest constricted. "I wouldn't have to barge in if you'd spoken to me with decency in the first place," she said, voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "I tried to talk to you at the gala. You humiliated me." A muscle in Travis's jaw tightened. He waved a dismissive hand, and the guard took a step back, still watching warily. "Let's not do this here," Travis muttered. "We can talk for 5 minutes, then you leave." Ashley opened her mouth to protest the time limit, but a sudden surge of movement caught her attention. One of Travis's colleagues, presumably a higher-up, walked over to him with a thick folder and started whispering urgently. Travis listened, his mouth pressing into a hard line. Ashley caught fragments of the conversation, something about a delay, shareholders, and schedules. Frustration mounted inside her. She needed a real moment with Travis, but it looked as if once again he would slip away. As if on cue, Travis turned back and gave her a curt nod. I can't deal with this now. Security will see you out." His voice was calm, but final. "No," she blurted, feeling the heat of desperation in her cheeks. "You can't just dismiss me. I have something to say that affects both of us." She wanted to reveal the pregnancy right then and there, to force him to confront reality, but her voice faltered. The fear of more public humiliation clawed at her resolve. What if he turned it into another spectacle? This was exactly what she didn't want. An audience gawking at her private life. The guard, apparently sensing Travis's dismissal as an order, moved in to grab Ashley's arm again. Outrage and panic jolted through her like a bolt of electricity. She tried to pull away, raising her voice. "Get your hands off me! I'm not causing trouble. I just need to talk to him." Some of the bystanders took out their phones, no doubt recording the confrontation. It dawned on Ashley that her face might end up plastered online once again, fueling more gossip. Still, she refused to be manhandled. She twisted free, feeling her heart pound. Travis took a step closer, exasperation etched on his features. "Look at this scene you're causing," he hissed quietly. "If you think this is how you'll get me to hear you out, you're sorely mistaken." She planted her feet, refusing to cower. "I wouldn't have to cause a scene if you just talked to me. You're making this harder than it has to be." A tense silence stretched between them. All around, people watched with rapt attention. At last, Travis exhaled as though conceding a minor defeat. "Fine," he muttered under his breath. "Give your number to my assistant. I'll set up a meeting, but not here, not now." Ashley's chest tightened. She should say something about the child right now, but the words refused to come. Her emotions tangled, and she found herself nodding despite wanting so much more than an empty promise to arrange a meeting. She wrote down her phone number on a notepad his assistant handed over. The moment felt surreal, like an odd business transaction rather than a personal conversation about their entangled lives. The guard hovered until she started walking back toward the elevator. Her shoulders slumped as the adrenaline in her system began to crash. She glanced over her shoulder once. Travis was already engrossed in whatever business crisis had demanded his attention, barely sparing her another glance. It stung, but she tried to reassure herself that she had at least forced him to acknowledge her existence and, hopefully, set the stage for a real conversation. Once on the street, the sharp winter air made her gasp. She stepped away from the glass doors, ignoring the startled looks of passers-by who'd probably seen her being shoved out moments earlier. Her pulse pounded in her ears, and her breath came in shallow gulps. The entire confrontation replayed in her mind like a shaky video clip. She couldn't help but feel that Travis still believed she was there just to make trouble. Waves of queasiness rolled over her, doubling her over for a moment. She pressed a hand to her stomach, alarm lancing through her. This kind of stress was precisely what the doctor had warned her about. In that instant, she remembered she had more than just her pride at stake. She had to protect herself and her unborn child. She straightened, fighting off the dizziness, and stared at the distant skyline. Fearing for the baby, Ashley realized the stakes had just skyrocketed. She must protect not only her dignity, but her unborn child. Ashley curled up on her worn-out sofa, the city lights casting faint patterns through the thin curtains. Night pressed in around her, restless and heavy with all the revelations she carried. She rested one hand on her abdomen, letting the gentle pressure be a silent promise. "I'm here," she whispered, voice low and trembling. "I'll protect you no matter what." The tension of the day still clung to her muscles, and she wiped away a tear with the back of her hand. The confrontation at Westvale Corporate Tower replayed in her mind, making her stomach tighten. She tried to calm her breathing, counting each inhale and exhale until she drifted into a fitful sleep. Morning arrived too soon, pale sunlight filtering into her small apartment. Her phone buzzed with a message from Tanya, offering to bring coffee. Ashley yawned and made her way to the door, letting Tanya in. They settled at the tiny table by the window, sipping steaming cups of strong brew. Ashley felt the swirl of anxiety deepen with every sip. She had been avoiding the full conversation for days. How she got pregnant and why Travis was at the center of this emotional hurricane. Tanya eyed her with patient concern, but there was an unmistakable hint of curiosity. "We need to talk," she said softly. "For real." Ashley hesitated, her hand trembling around the coffee cup. "I'm pregnant," she finally admitted, and for a moment her words felt like an echo in a silent room. "It's Travis's." It was the first time she'd spoken the truth so plainly. Tears sprang to her eyes and she blinked them back, not wanting to start the day in a torrent of emotion. Tanya's reaction was an unguarded mix of shock and sympathy. Her eyes widened and her mouth fell open before she composed herself and reached across the table, resting a hand on Ashley's. "Okay," she said in a measured tone. "Okay, that's a lot." "Oh, Ashley." Tanya shook her head in disbelief. "So that night at the gala, he humiliated you. And before that," Ashley interrupted, voice catching, it was just one of those nights where I thought maybe he cared." She stared at the steaming coffee, remembering how she'd felt a fleeting connection, something that had been buried under his cold remarks. "It all turned ugly when he found out I'm not exactly from his world." Tanya pursed her lips, her eyes softening. "You can't handle all this alone. Have you considered, legal advice, medical help?" Ashley managed a shaky laugh. "Legal advice, sure. Let me check my piggy bank first." She rubbed her temples. "I'm just trying to keep up with my mom's hospital bills, and now this baby on top of everything." They spent the next hour searching local community resources on Tanya's phone, looking for low-cost legal services or pregnancy support centers. Each click led to more questions and limited options. Ashley's head started pounding, and she fought the urge to curl into a ball on the sofa. She had to keep pushing forward, no matter how overwhelming it felt. An alert on Tanya's social media flashed an article. "Mystery woman causes scene at Westvale Corporate Tower. Is she Travis's newest problem?" A grainy phone photo showed Ashley caught mid-argument with the security guard. Tanya cursed under her breath. "We live in an age where everyone's got a camera." Ashley scrolled through the post, swallowing hard at the cruel comments. Some users mocked her clothes, while others speculated she was just another gold digger. She set the phone down, her cheeks burning. "Great," she muttered, massaging her temples. As if Travis's ridicule wasn't enough, now half the internet is piling on. Tanya reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "Ignore the trolls," she said firmly. "Focus on what matters." A couple of hours later, Ashley forced herself to leave the apartment for her shift at the small boutique where she worked part-time. As she entered the store, she noticed co-workers whispering behind a rack of dresses. The older manager gave her a knowing look before mumbling something under his breath. Ashley hurried to the register and tried to focus on her tasks, but the tension in the air clung like a fog. During a lull in customers, she overheard two of her colleagues gossiping near the break room. "That's her, I'm sure," one hissed. "The one with Travis, right?" Ashley tried to pretend she couldn't hear, her cheeks flushing with a mix of embarrassment and anger. Still, she couldn't bring herself to say anything. She needed this job, even if it was only a handful of hours each week. Halfway through her shift, the chime above the store's glass door jingled. A middle-aged man stepped in, scanning the racks. Something about the way he looked around set Ashley's nerves on edge. She recognized the furtive curiosity in his eyes, the hint of recognition on his face. As he approached the counter, the corners of his mouth tightened into a forced smile. "You're Ashley, right?" he asked, voice low. Her stomach dropped. "Do I know you?" He pulled out a small notepad. "I'm a freelance writer for the local tabloids. I've got a story in the works. Travis's corporate meltdown, mysterious woman, that kind of thing." Ashley's throat went dry. She glanced around, but the other employees were too busy pretending not to notice. "I don't have a story to tell," she replied, making her voice as steady as possible. He chuckled, leaning closer. "You sure about that?" Word on the street is you've got some complicated ties to him. Could be worth your while to talk. If you've got something good, I can pay." A swirl of anger and panic lit up her chest. "I'm not selling out my life for a tabloid piece," she said, a hair away from shouting. "Please leave." His tone turned cajoling. "Come on, you've seen the buzz. If you're his ex or something, you could set the record straight." When she refused to respond, he shrugged. "Suit yourself. But these stories don't go away just because you ignore them." With that, he turned on his heel and left, leaving Ashley to reel from the confrontation. She took a break a few minutes later, heading for the small staff area at the back of the store. Leaning against the wall, she tried to steady her breathing. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she jumped, heart pounding. When she saw it was just a call from the clinic reminding her of a future prenatal appointment, she exhaled, relief momentarily flooding her chest. At least it wasn't more drama. She stepped out of the break room to find Tanya at the checkout counter, rummaging through her wallet. Apparently, Tanya had popped in unannounced. Ashley hurried over. "What are you doing here?" Tanya shrugged, offering a tiny smile. "I wanted to check on you. Plus, I need some new socks." Her eyes darted around, clearly noticing the tension in the store. "You okay?" Ashley nodded, not trusting her voice just yet. She rang up Tanya's purchase and bagged the socks. They stepped to the corner of the shop where nobody was likely to overhear. Tanya lowered her voice. "I figured someone might come snooping. This is big gossip. Travis's name draws clicks. You sure you're managing?" Ashley's eyes glistened for a second, but she blinked back the sudden sting of tears. "Managing is a big word. I'm just trying to cope." Before Tanya could respond, the manager spotted them and cleared his throat pointedly, reminding Ashley she was still on the clock. Tanya shot her a sympathetic look before heading out. The rest of Ashley's shift was marked by nervous glances and hushed discussions she tried to ignore. By the time she clocked out, she felt drained to her core. After a quick stop at home to grab a few things, she took the bus to the hospital. The stale air inside the vehicle did nothing to soothe her nausea, and she silently prayed the ride would be short. As soon as she reached the hospital corridor leading to her mother's room, her heartbeat steadied just a little. This place, although flooded with worry and medical machines, was also where she felt needed. Her mother was relying on her. Inside the room, her mother lay sleeping, hooked up to the machines that were keeping her stable. Ashley quietly pulled up a chair, setting her belongings aside. She gently touched her mother's frail hand, remembering the times her mother had cared for her with unwavering warmth. Now it was her turn to be the pillar of strength. The beep of the monitors filled the silence, each pulse a reminder that time was precious. Just then, her phone vibrated. Thinking it might be Tanya or the clinic, she glanced at the screen. But the number was unknown. Again. Her heart thumped as she opened the text. "He's moving forward with an engagement. You didn't hear it from me." Ashley's breath caught in her throat. Engagement? She stared at the words, suddenly cold despite the hospital's heating system. Did that mean he was actually getting married? A chill ran down her spine. She tightened her grip on the phone, feeling a twist of confusion and hurt. She set it down, looking at her mother's peaceful face. Her entire world was teetering on the edge of more shocking revelations. Her pulse hammered as she read the message again, as though hoping the words would change. He's getting married? Ashley lingered by her mother's hospital bed, rereading that ominous text about Travis's engagement. A faint hiss from the IV machine filled the silence, and every slow breath her mother took seemed to echo in Ashley's chest. She tried to bury the thought that he might truly be marrying someone else, that the father of her unborn child was going forward with a glossy new life, but the message's words played over and over in her mind. She'd never felt so invisible. Eventually, she leaned over to kiss her mother's forehead, then stepped into the corridor to call Tanya. As soon as Tanya picked up, Ashley whispered, "He's getting married. I got a text that confirms it." "What?" Tanya nearly shouted. "That can't be right. Are you sure it isn't just gossip?" Ashley's voice trembled. "I don't know, but it feels real. I've heard rumors for days. His fiancée is supposed to be someone important, some socialite. Now it all makes sense why he's been so dismissive." Tanya exhaled on the other end. "Look, I'm coming over later. We'll figure this out." The call ended, leaving Ashley alone with her racing thoughts. She imagined Travis standing at an altar, smirking that arrogant smirk, while she fought for pennies to pay her mother's bills. The harsh contrast made her furious. Her heart felt too tight in her chest. That evening, back at her small apartment, she and Tanya sat cross-legged on the floor, rummaging through old boxes and half-eaten containers of takeout. Tanya pulled up a social media post from a local tabloid site. Sure enough, there was a mention of a major fundraiser happening at an exclusive downtown venue. Apparently, Travis and his fiancée would be headlining the event. "I bet he'll be there," Tanya said, chewing on a thumbnail. "If you really want to talk to him again, this might be your chance." Ashley swallowed, considering the possibility. The thought of facing him again, especially in another glittering high-society space, made her stomach twist. Yet a spark of determination flared inside her. She'd already been humiliated once in that world. What was one more night? If it was the only way to corner Travis and get real answers, maybe it was worth the risk. She touched her abdomen, remembering her promise to the child inside. She didn't want to bring a baby into a life overshadowed by secrets and shame. She agreed. And so, a few days later, she found herself staring at her reflection in a small mirror. Tanya had done her makeup, carefully concealing the circles under her eyes. Her borrowed gown, a soft lavender color, clung awkwardly at the hips, but it was the best they could manage. Ashley brushed invisible lint from the fabric, nerves snapping like electric wires in her chest. "Are you sure about this?" Tanya asked from the living room. "You still have time to back out." "I have to do this," Ashley replied, gathering her courage. "I can't let him walk away without knowing the truth." She paused, her gaze flicking downward. "And I won't let him or his fiancée pretend I don't exist." Tanya gave her a quick hug, then the two of them left for the fundraiser. The event venue, an upscale hotel's grand ballroom, was ablaze with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Valets in crisp uniforms opened gilded doors for arriving guests, each stepping out of sleek cars or luxury SUVs. Ashley felt a pang of self-consciousness as she and Tanya arrived in a modest vehicle, the borrowed dress suddenly feeling like it might rip at the seams. But she lifted her chin and walked inside, letting the swirl of lively music and chatter wash over her. The ballroom was awash in champagne flutes and hushed conversations, well-dressed attendees gliding around like they'd been born in this glitter. Ashley's heart hammered. She fought the urge to turn back and run. Instead, she reminded herself, her mother's hospital bills, her unborn child, her own self-respect. The thought fueled her steps forward. She spotted Travis almost instantly. He was at the far side of the room, in a tailored tuxedo that accentuated his broad shoulders. Standing beside him was a stunning woman in a shimmering silver gown. The woman's posture radiated elegance. Her dark hair swept into a perfect chignon, and her lips formed a flawless smile. Ashley's pulse accelerated. So that was the fiancé. They looked every bit the glamorous power couple people would fawn over in magazines. Tanya, sensing Ashley's hesitation, gently pressed a flute of sparkling water into her hand. "You've got this. Just wait for the right moment," she advised quietly, scanning the crowd to make sure no prying tabloid reporter was lurking nearby. For a while, Ashley hovered at the edges, trying to blend in. She recognized a few faces from the last gala, and she overheard whispers of speculation about who she was. Nobody approached her directly. It was as if she was a faint curiosity, a presence that didn't quite fit but was too invisible to confront. Meanwhile, Travis and his fiancée glided from one circle to another, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries in a choreographed dance of influence. Finally, as the evening wore on, Ashley saw her chance. Travis slipped away from the main group, briefly alone by a tall window overlooking the city lights. She swallowed hard and moved closer, weaving through the crowd until she was at his side. A rush of adrenaline flooded her senses when he turned, eyes widening in recognition. He looked handsome up close, but that same guarded expression crossed his face. "You again," he said, voice low so as not to attract attention. "What are you doing here?" "This is a public fundraiser," she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have every right to be here. I tried calling you. You never responded." He gave a half shrug, flicking his gaze around to make sure no one else was within earshot. "You should have taken the hint." Biting back her anger, Ashley stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I told you it was urgent. Can you spare a moment to talk in private?" Travis's jaw tightened. Before he could reply, his fiancée suddenly appeared at his elbow, looking Ashley up and down with disinterest. "Everything all right, darling?" she purred, placing a possessive hand on Travis's arm. Her gaze slid over to Ashley. "You're the woman from that rumor, yes?" Ashley's cheeks flamed, but she refused to retreat. "I need to speak with Travis, alone." The fiancé let out a soft laugh, almost pitying. "I don't think that's necessary." Her tone was cool but laced with poison. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of me. I'm fully aware of all his dealings." Heat flared in Ashley's chest. "I doubt you know everything," she said, voice trembling slightly. At that, Travis exhaled, like he wished he were anywhere else. "Look, let's keep our voices down." He placed a hand on his fiancée's wrist. "Let me handle this." "She must want something," the fiancée added, her eyes flicking over Ashley's less expensive dress. "Money, perhaps? A donation, is that it?" Ashley clenched her fists, swallowing an angry retort. She hadn't come for a handout. She'd come for respect and acknowledgement. "I'm not here for your charity," she answered, her voice brittle with anger. "I'm here because Travis needs to know I'm pregnant, and he's the father." For a split second, the fiancée's refined mask cracked, her eyes flaring with disbelief. Travis's entire stance went rigid, as though someone had poured ice water down his back. Ashley could almost feel the hush ripple outward from them, like a shockwave passing through onlookers who caught a snippet of her words. A few heads turned, attracted by the tense exchange. The music and laughter in the background continued, but to Ashley, it felt like the entire world had narrowed to this moment. Travis recovered quickly, adopting a cold glare that bored into Ashley. "Is this some new ploy?" he demanded, voice low but seething. "Trying to blackmail me? I don't buy it." Her eyes stung, but she lifted her chin. "It's the truth," she said quietly, refusing to buckle. "I have medical records, everything. I never asked for this, but you can't just keep ignoring what happened." The fiancé's face twisted in a mix of outrage and disbelief. "She's lying, Travis," she hissed. "Obviously, she's a fraud." A few more curious glances flitted their way, and Ashley realized a small crowd was forming an invisible ring around them. She could see phones raised discreetly, cameras capturing the scene, feeding the rumor mill that had already latched onto her image once before. Refusing to hide, she pressed on. "I'm not lying. And if you have any shred of decency, you'd at least listen before dismissing me." She fought back tears of frustration. "I'm not here to ruin your life. I just want you to face reality." Travis's breathing was shallow, his expression unreadable except for the tension etched in the lines around his mouth. "This is not the time or place," he ground out. His knuckles had gone white where he gripped the back of a nearby chair. Ashley's voice shook. "When is the time or place, then? You've been dodging me for weeks." All around them, the guests whispered in frantic confusion. The fiancée locked eyes with Ashley, her lips curled into a sneer. "You've done enough damage," she snapped. "Don't you dare embarrass him, and by extension me, like this in front of everyone." Before Ashley could respond, a bold partygoer stepped closer, curiosity gleaming in her eyes. "Is everything all right over here?" she asked, a feigned look of concern on her face. It was clear she was hoping for gossip. Travis's nostrils flared, and he gave Ashley a look of pure frustration. "You think you can humiliate me right here in public? Accusing me of fathering your child?" He turned to the people watching and let out a forced chuckle, but the sound rang hollow. "She's just confused." That dismissive remark ignited a spark of righteous anger in Ashley's chest. She stepped forward, holding his gaze. "Don't you dare treat me like some random stranger," she said, voice raised now. "You humiliated me once, and I kept quiet. But not again. I'm not leaving until you acknowledge this baby. I'm done letting you pretend we never happened." The onlookers gasped, the air thick with electricity. A hush enveloped the crowd, broken only by the faint clink of champagne glasses. Ashley's pulse raced, her whole body trembling, but there was a fierce determination in her eyes. She had finally said the words out loud, and there was no going back. Travis's fiancé, face paling under her perfect makeup, whispered something furious to him. Then, with a regal tilt of her chin, she turned and walked briskly toward a side exit, a flurry of silver sequins trailing behind her. But the audience remained, riveted by the confrontation. Travis set his jaw, narrowing his eyes at Ashley. "If you're serious," he said in a low voice, "then prove it." A wave of murmurs and hushed chatter spread through the onlookers, like a ripple across a still pond. Ashley glared back at him, fists clenched at her sides, every muscle in her body taut as a wire. The humiliating stares of the crowd pressed in on her, but she refused to shrink away, and right then she found a sliver of her old courage. "I'll get you all the proof you want," she declared, her voice ringing with the resolve she'd been forced to show ever since her mother fell ill. "Don't doubt that for a second." He started to say something else, but a cameraman pushed forward, snapping photos at rapid speed. The tension in the air threatened to explode. Ashley felt Tanya tug at her arm, trying to pull her away before she got swallowed by the swirling mass of gossip-hungry onlookers. But she wouldn't budge until she got her final words in, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. As whispers ripple through the crowd, Travis narrows his eyes at Ashley, demanding proof. Ashley clenches her fists and promises she'll have it. Very soon. Ashley's heart pounded long after she left that glittering fundraiser, the echo of her confrontation with Travis ringing in her ears. She had shouted the truth in front of everyone, admitted she was pregnant with his child, only to be slapped with public disbelief and cold, dismissive stares. The whirlwind of cameras, the sting of his fiancé's words, the pitying looks of onlookers, it all replayed in her head like a feverish loop. Once home, she barely managed to shower and change before collapsing onto her mattress, exhaustion rolling over her in waves. The next day brought its own share of turmoil. She woke to find her phone swamped with messages and missed calls. Online, rumors were exploding. Blogs and gossip pages already had photos of her confrontation with Travis, fueling new speculation about a possible pregnancy scandal. Some comments called her a gold digger or an opportunist, while others, surprisingly, seemed to sympathize. She stared at the screen until her eyes hurt, fighting the urge to argue with strangers who knew nothing of her reality. Mid-morning, Tanya came by with coffee and a troubled expression, letting herself into Ashley's small apartment. She placed the cups on the table, flicking through the latest headlines on her phone. "It's crazy, Ash," she sighed, setting the device down. "They're spinning it in 1,000 different directions. Are you okay?" Ashley pressed a hand to her forehead, fighting off a headache. "Not really," she admitted. "But I made my bed. Now I have to lie in it, right?" She caught sight of her reflection in the kitchen window, hair disheveled and face pale, and forced herself to stand straighter. Tanya studied her closely. "You don't look so good. How's the baby?" For a moment, Ashley's hand slid protectively to her lower abdomen, a familiar wave of worry cresting inside her. "I'm supposed to go in for a more detailed checkup soon. The doctor called last week. Something about scheduling an ultrasound." She trailed off, forcing a hollow laugh. I'll have to see if I can even afford it. Medical bills keep stacking up for me and my mom. Feels like they'll bury me any day now. Tanya reached out, gently rubbing Ashley's shoulder. We'll figure something out. Let me know the clinic time. I'll go with you. Later that afternoon, they did exactly that. Ashley booked an appointment at a community health center offering reduced fees. The waiting room was cramped, walls lined with fading posters about prenatal care and healthy eating. Every other seat seemed to be taken by expectant mothers flipping through outdated magazines. Anxiety flickered in Ashley's chest as she realized she was one of them now. Another woman with a belly soon to swell, a future uncertain, and no partner by her side. Except for Tanya, who gave her an encouraging smile every time their eyes met. Eventually, a nurse called her name. Tanya squeezed her hand for luck, then watched Ashley disappear behind a curtain. The exam room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the overhead lights felt harsh. A weary-looking doctor introduced herself kindly, instructing Ashley to lie back on the examination bed. The cold gel made Ashley flinch, but she tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the rhythmic beep of the nearby machine. The doctor spent several minutes moving the ultrasound probe across Ashley's abdomen, her eyes fixed on the monitor's flickering images. Ashley squinted, trying to decipher the shapes on the screen. Her nerves ratcheted tighter when the doctor's brows knitted in concentration. "Everything okay?" Ashley asked softly, her throat dry. "Well," the doctor began, exhaling slowly, "I'm picking up more than one heartbeat." She glanced at Ashley with a gentle smile. "It appears you're carrying multiples." Ashley's mind raced. "Multiples? You mean twins?" Her voice trembled between shock and faint relief. Twins would be a lot to handle, but it wasn't unimaginable, right? The doctor shook her head, eyes returning to the screen. "No," she said, as if parsing her words carefully. "It's triplets, 3 separate heartbeats." Ashley's own heart seemed to miss a beat. Triplets. Suddenly her chest felt too tight, and she broke into a cold sweat. The doctor said something reassuring about specialized care and frequent checkups, but Ashley couldn't process it all. Her thoughts swirled. How would she manage 3 babies? She couldn't even pay her mother's hospital bills. Travis was engaged to another woman, and she had no stable job to rely on. This changed everything. Yet again. She swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "Triplets," she whispered. "Okay." After the appointment, Ashley walked out in a daze. Tanya shot to her feet, scanning Ashley's pale face. "What happened? Is everything all right?" Ashley's gaze was distant. "Triplets," she managed, leaning against the wall for support. "I'm having 3 babies," Tanya gasped, dropping her purse in surprise. She recovered quickly, pulling Ashley into a tight hug. "Oh my God, Ash. Okay, we'll handle this. We have to." Leaving the clinic felt surreal. The city's bustle seemed louder, the sunlight harsher. Every step Ashley took felt heavier, as though her body were already adjusting to the monumental shift ahead. She pressed a protective hand to her belly, fresh waves of anxiety clashing with a sudden powerful resolve. These children were hers. They deserved a safe life. She wasn't sure how she'd manage, but she knew one thing. Travis needed to know the entire truth, and he needed to stop denouncing her as a liar. That evening, as Ashley tried to eat a small dinner in her dimly lit apartment, she noticed a news piece trending online. There was Travis, in a polished interview, shrugging off questions about the incident at the fundraiser. He coolly referred to it as a baseless claim from someone who craved attention. In the clip, he wore a crisp suit and an air of smug confidence, completely ignoring the possibility that her allegations might be genuine. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't just her reputation on the line. 3 lives were at stake. Emotions churned inside her: fear, anger, betrayal, and a fierce protectiveness she hadn't expected. As if on cue, the phone rang. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. An unfamiliar male voice introduced himself as an associate in Travis's business circle. "I saw your story in the press," he said hesitantly. "Let's just say not everyone in the company believes what Travis is saying." Ashley froze, uncertain. "Who are you? Why would you reach out to me?" A pause crackled on the line. "I prefer to stay anonymous for now. Let's just say I've watched how you've been treated, and I think you deserve a chance to prove your side." A hint of urgency edged his voice. "If you have solid evidence, medical records, statements, this could change things, but you'll need to move fast." Before she could ask more, the line went dead. She set the phone down, heart pounding. Maybe not everyone in Travis's orbit was as dismissive as he was. Could this tip help her turn the tide? Over the next few days, the online smear campaign intensified. Trolling comments attacked Ashley's character, calling her a liar, an opportunist, a nobody trying to latch onto a wealthy man. Her part-time job hours were cut abruptly, her manager citing too much drama when reporters started lurking around. Bills ballooned. Meanwhile, her mother's health showed no improvement, and hospital staff politely but firmly reminded Ashley of the growing balance on her account. Through it all, Tanya remained by her side, encouraging her to pursue at least a preliminary paternity test. "We have to gather every shred of evidence. He asked for proof, remember?" she said, pacing Ashley's tiny living room. "If he can't see reason, at least you can present the truth to someone who will listen." Ashley nodded, chewing her lip. "I'm not sure how. Full paternity testing might require Travis's DNA." Tanya shrugged. "Then we find another route. Talk to specialists, lawyers, whoever can help. You can't do this alone, not anymore." Despite her fatigue and morning sickness, Ashley spent her days scouring any resource for help. Legal aid clinics, financial support for expectant mothers, even searching for doctors who might conduct a partial paternity test. She found a clinic that offered something close to what she needed, a prenatal paternity test that used blood samples from the mother. It was expensive, but it was a start. If only Travis would cooperate. One night, Ashley was hunched over her laptop, scanning through documents, her eyes bloodshot and burning. She felt a flutter inside her belly, possibly one of the babies shifting. The sensation sent a rush of fierce devotion through her. She reached for her phone in a sudden burst of determination, planning to text that anonymous associate for more guidance. Before she could unlock it, the device vibrated in her hand, announcing a new message from the very same unknown number. Her eyes flicked over the screen and her heart lurched. The words were brief but electrifying. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., boardroom. Bring your proof." Ashley stared at it, adrenaline surging as she realized this was her shot, maybe her only shot, to confront Travis's world from a position of strength. She placed a trembling hand on her abdomen and exhaled slowly, a bead of sweat tracing down her temple. The baby's heartbeat seemed to pulse in her mind's eye, urging her onward. Late at night, a message from the anonymous ally arrives. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., boardroom. Bring your proof." Ashley's heart pounds. This could be her chance. Ashley woke at dawn, her body thrumming with a nervous energy she couldn't dispel. She dressed carefully, choosing simple but tidy clothes, a plain blouse, slacks that no longer fit as loosely as before. Her expanding belly made everything feel snug, but she tried not to dwell on that. The text's instructions repeated in her mind, "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. boardroom, bring your proof." She'd gathered every piece of evidence she had, ultrasound images, brief notes from her doctor confirming she was carrying triplets, printouts of the prenatal appointment receipts. She placed them gently in a slim folder, then tucked it under her arm. She couldn't shake the storm of doubt brewing in her stomach. Would they even let her inside the building? The memory of being shoved aside by security still burned, but this time felt different, as if something larger were at play behind the scenes. She kept thinking of the anonymous associate who'd urged her to come. Maybe, just maybe, that meant someone on the inside believed her. As the bus rattled through morning traffic, Ashley stared out the window at a world carrying on its usual business. People hustled to jobs, to schools, to errands. Yet her day felt anything but normal. Her breath hitched each time she remembered Travis's accusations and his lawyer's threats. She closed her eyes, inhaling slowly. No matter how fraught this was, she owed it to herself and her unborn children to speak up. Arriving at the towering office complex, she stepped onto the sidewalk, head held high. The building was a monolith of glass reflecting the sky, dwarfing everything nearby. A swirl of polished executives and busy professionals streamed in and out of the revolving doors. Swallowing her nerves, Ashley marched forward. She spotted 2 tall security guards by the front desk, both wearing stern expressions. Her hands went clammy, but she forced her steps not to falter. A receptionist eyed her with skepticism as she approached, but Ashley stated her name calmly. "I'm expected in the boardroom at 9, she said, willing her voice to hold steady. The receptionist's brow arched. She tapped a few keys, then checked a list. With an almost imperceptible shrug, she handed Ashley a visitor's badge. "All right, proceed to the 42nd floor, the receptionist said, handing over a small electronic pass. Ashley blinked, thanking her softly, startled that she wasn't being blocked. She clutched her folder tighter, adrenaline pulsing through her limbs as she headed for the elevator bank. Inside the elevator, the numbers rose in quick succession, 35, 36, 37. With each floor, Ashley felt her heartbeats multiply. She smoothed her hair, wondering who would be waiting. The elevator dinged, doors gliding open onto a sleek corridor lined with glossy doors and plush carpeting. At the far end, 2 more guards stood sentry outside large double doors. She strode forward, determined not to cower, until she was close enough to see the swirl of corporate logos etched on the frosted glass. One guard stepped aside to let her pass, as though they'd been instructed to. The other held open the door. Inside, the boardroom stretched wide, a polished table at its center, surrounded by chairs that faced a wall of glass overlooking the city skyline. Ashley's gaze flickered from face to face. About a dozen people in tailored suits were present, some older, some younger, all with a certain formidable air. Her stomach clenched when she recognized Travis near the far end. He stood talking to a severe-looking lawyer, the same one from before. She took a tentative step, trying to ignore her trembling knees. The room buzzed with hushed conversation that died out the instant she was noticed. Travis looked up, tension creasing his brows. For a moment his expression was unreadable, but the lawyer at his side cleared his throat and advanced. Ashley stiffened. "I have documents to show," she said, voice neither loud nor apologetic. She placed the folder on the table, her fingers lingering at the edges. "Ms. Pierce," the lawyer addressed her briskly, as though reading from a script. "You've made claims against my client regarding paternity. Now you barge in here hoping to sway this company's board. Are you aware of the legal implications of slander?" A wave of indignation rippled through Ashley. She forced herself to speak calmly. "I'm not slandering anyone. These documents confirm my pregnancy. I'm carrying 3 babies and Travis is their father." She shot a glance at Travis, searching his eyes. If he felt any shock at the number of babies, he hid it well. Murmurs broke out among the seated board members. An older man in a dark suit raised a hand, quieting the room. "Young lady, you understand this is a corporate setting, correct? Why bring this to us?" Ashley's voice quivered just a bit, but she stood her ground. "I was told to come here. Someone in your company reached out saying there are people who want the truth. Travis keeps dismissing me in public, but I'm done being silenced. All I want is acknowledgement, and for him to stop dragging my name through the mud." Travis exhaled, gripping the back of a chair so hard his knuckles whitened. "This is inappropriate," he said tightly. "We're here to discuss business, not indulge fantasies." Ashley's chest burned. "Is it a fantasy that I collapsed from stress in a public place? That I had to show up at your events because you refused to answer my calls? That I'm in debt up to my ears trying to keep my mother alive in the hospital? She held her voice steady, scanning the solemn faces around the table. Meanwhile, you go on TV calling me a liar. Travis's lawyer interjected. We have no proof these children are his. Any random ultrasound means nothing without a legitimate paternity test. And public outbursts like yours, Ms. Pierce, constitute harassment. He turned to the board. We can pursue defamation claims if she continues this baseless campaign. A thick tension pressed on the room. Some board members looked uneasy, avoiding Ashley's gaze. Others regarded her with open skepticism. Ashley swallowed hard, then opened the folder, extracting the ultrasound prints. These show the 3 babies. I also have partial medical reports. She passed them across the table, her throat constricting when nobody reached for them at first. Finally, the older man gingerly picked them up, adjusting his reading glasses. Travis shifted. Enough, he snapped, tension lacing every syllable. I've had enough of this charade. If you won't leave willingly, we'll have security remove you. Ashley's nostrils flared. I'm not leaving until you look me in the eye and acknowledge what you did, she replied, voice cracking on the final word. The memory of every belittling remark, every rumor, every hospital bill lit a spark of resolve in her. Deny me all you want, Travis, but don't think for a second you can deny these children. Suddenly, one of the board members, a middle-aged woman with sharp features, leaned forward, eyeing Travis. You're engaged, correct? She asked pointedly. Is there a risk that this situation could damage the company's reputation if it isn't handled properly? A flicker of unease crossed Travis's face. His fiancée was from an influential family, and rumors of scandal could certainly pose problems. The lawyer shot the woman a look of warning, but she simply pursed her lips, waiting for an answer. Travis cleared his throat, feigning composure. Whatever Ms. Pierce claims, we'll address it privately. Ashley felt the hairs on her neck bristle. Privately? She echoed. I tried that, and you humiliated me, had me thrown out and accused me of chasing money. Her voice rose, betraying her frustration. All I want is for you to do the right thing. Just then, the door swung open, and 2 security guards stepped inside, alerted by someone's silent signal. Ashley sensed her window of opportunity closing. Her heart pounded so fiercely it seemed to echo in her ears. She gathered the ultrasound pictures back into her folder, determination warring with the sting of public rejection. The older man at the table glanced between Travis and Ashley, then made a small gesture as though he understood there was more to this story than he'd initially assumed. But no one came to Ashley's defense. Her chest constricted. If she stayed, the guards would drag her out. She breathed in, tears burning behind her eyes, and took 1 step back. Travis watched with a mixture of relief and something resembling guilt flickering across his features. He avoided her gaze as the guards approached, standing at the periphery. Ashley set her jaw. They might kick me out, but I made my point, she told herself. Someone here believes me. She turned on her heel, head held high, and walked to the door. The guards flanked her, but she didn't let them lay a hand on her. Her legs felt like lead by the time she reached the corridor. Once outside, the tension left her body in a shudder. She quickly pressed the elevator button, ignoring the curious glances of employees passing by. Finally, the elevator arrived. She stepped in alone, the doors closing on the plush hallway. Her mind buzzed, replaying the accusation, the board member's silence, Travis's closed-off expression. She realized she was shaking. This wasn't the victory she'd dreamed of, but at least she'd forced them to listen, if only for a few frantic minutes. In the lobby, she dropped off the visitor's badge and walked out onto the busy street. Cars honked, pedestrians bustled around her, but it felt like an entirely different world compared to the tense boardroom above. She took a shaky breath, letting the cool air clear her head. Tears threatened to spill, but she blinked them back, telling herself to stay strong just a little longer. Just as she stepped onto the street, Ashley's phone buzzes. It's an unexpected call from Travis's fiancée. The text on the screen reads, "We need to talk. Privately." Ashley stared at the incoming call on her phone, the name listed as unknown, though she had a good idea who it might be. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. The ring seemed to last forever until she mustered the courage and pressed the button. A cool, measured voice slid through the speaker. "Hello? Ashley?" It was unmistakably Travis's fiancée, the woman with a piercing gaze and an air of effortless wealth. Hearing her speak Ashley's name felt jarring, yet Ashley forced herself to respond. "Yes, I'm here." There was a beat of silence, then the fiancée cleared her throat. "We need to meet, privately. I think you know why." The tension in her words was palpable. "How about we do this somewhere discreet? I'll text you an address." Before Ashley could fully agree or protest, the line went dead. She lowered the phone, heart still pounding, questions tumbling in her head. She had no illusions that this meeting would be pleasant, but something in the fiancé's tone hinted at desperation, or perhaps fear. Moments later, her phone buzzed again, a location pinned on a map, a small cafe on the quieter side of town. A time, 6 in the evening. In less than an hour. Ashley glanced at the clock on her phone. Time enough to get there, but not much else. Her nerves twisted uncomfortably. Part of her wanted to ignore the summons altogether, to save herself the stress. But after the fiasco in the boardroom, she felt like she had no choice. This might be the only chance to end the stalemate. She couldn't face it alone, though. She dialed Tanya in a rush, explaining what had just happened. Tanya's reaction was immediate. "No way you're going by yourself," she declared, words quick and forceful. "I'll take you. If things go south, I'll be close by." Ashley exhaled gratefully. "Thanks. Really." She paused, thinking of the baby. No, the babies, in her womb. A quiet ache of anxiety hummed in her chest. "I just want to hear her out." 40 minutes later, Tanya's small car pulled up to the curb outside Ashley's apartment. The late afternoon sky draped itself in muted grays, threatening to rain. Ashley climbed in, feeling the tension coil tighter with every mile they drove. The cafe was tucked between an antique bookstore and a shuttered bakery. Warm light glowed behind the windows. Ashley and Tanya exchanged looks before Ashley slipped out of the car. "I'll be right here," Tanya said, rolling down her window just a crack. "Text me if you need me." Ashley nodded. The cafe's bell jingled above her as she stepped inside, the smell of brewed coffee blending with the quiet hum of conversation. A few patrons sat scattered at small wooden tables, sipping drinks or scrolling through their phones. And there, at a secluded corner table, she spotted the fiancé, a striking figure in a tailored coat, fingers tapping against the tabletop with practiced impatience. Ashley swallowed hard, approached the table, and eased into the chair opposite her. The fiancé lifted her gaze, scanning Ashley's face. There was no immediate greeting, just a tense stillness. After a moment, the fiancé signaled the barista for 2 coffees. Ashley doubted she could keep anything down, but she didn't protest. "You came?" the fiancé said at last, brushing an invisible speck of dust from her coat sleeve. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm here," Ashley replied, voice steadier than she felt. "Let's skip the polite chatter. Why did you want to see me?" The fiancé's lips thinned. "Because I'm not an idiot, and I suspect you're not lying about the pregnancy. I was prepared to dismiss you as some scammer, but now I'm less certain." She paused, a flicker of genuine uncertainty passing over her eyes. "You've caused quite a stir. Travis is furious. The board is uneasy." She took a measured breath. "And I'm stuck in the middle." Ashley wanted to bristle at the words, "You've caused quite a stir," but she held her tongue. "If you believe me, or at least suspect I might be telling the truth, why ask me here?" A waitress placed 2 cups of coffee in front of them. The fiancé didn't touch hers, simply watched the steam coil upward. "Because all of this undermines me too. We're set to be married and suddenly there's you and this child, or these children. Travis won't admit it outright, but I see the signs. Ashley inhaled sharply. Then you know how serious this is. There are 3 babies at stake. The fiancé's eyes flickered, and Ashley felt a slight surge of satisfaction. At least the triplets' news rattled her. 3, the fiancé echoed, her composure wavering just for a heartbeat. That makes it even more complicated. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I have an offer. A solution. The room seemed to draw in on Ashley. This was the moment she'd dreaded, yet expected. Money. A hush payment. She willed her pulse to stay steady. What offer? The fiancé folded her hands on the table. If you disappear quietly, stop speaking publicly about Travis, stop claiming these children are his, I'll make sure you're compensated. A sum that would more than cover your mother's medical expenses and keep you comfortable for a long while. She paused, her words measured. You'd also sign a non-disclosure agreement, of course. A cold wave of anger washed over Ashley, though she tried not to let it show on her face. She'd guessed this was coming, but the bluntness still shocked her. And if I say no? The fiancé set her jaw, a certain sharpness gleaming in her eyes. Then Travis and I will do everything in our power to ruin you. Legally, socially, you'll be painted as a con artist. She reached for a small bag at her side, pulling out a thin envelope. But I'm betting you won't choose that path, because you have a sick mother, a shaky financial situation, and now multiple unborn children. Ashley stared at the envelope. She imagined hospital bills vanishing, a stable home for her mother, prenatal care that didn't terrify her each month. But the thought of selling her truth, of pretending this baby drama was all a lie, everything in her recoiled. She reached for the envelope gingerly, curiosity warring with disgust. Inside, she glimpsed a check with a number large enough to make her gasp inwardly. It was more money than she'd dreamed of seeing in her lifetime. A painful silence settled. Ashley felt tears threaten at the corners of her eyes. You're offering me a way out, she said softly, but it means denying my babies a father and letting Travis walk away without any accountability. It means salvaging your life, the fiancé corrected, voice cold. You think Travis cares about you? He'll fight you in court until you're bankrupt. Do you really believe he'll show up for these babies? Or will they just be living proof of something he never wanted to begin with? Ashley flinched at that. She pictured Travis's hard stare, his words dripping with scorn. She remembered the gossip swirling around him, the way people froze in his presence. Maybe the fiancé was right. Maybe fighting was futile. But then she thought of her unborn children, imagined the guilt she'd feel if she gave up their right to be acknowledged. She recalled her mother's frail voice urging her never to surrender her dignity. The check wavered in her hands like a mirage. After a beat, Ashley returned the envelope to the table, her jaw tightening. I can't do that. I won't vanish. The fiancé pressed her lips together, nearly smiling in scorn. You're making a mistake. I might be, Ashley said, voice trembling just slightly. But at least it's my choice. My children deserve more than hush money. A flush of frustration colored the fiancé's cheeks, but she kept her voice quiet. Then you leave me no choice. My family name is on the line. Travis's empire is on the line. If you persist with this story, we'll bury you in legal battles you can't afford. I'm trying to help you, but you insist on doing this the hard way. The words landed like blows, but Ashley held firm. I appreciate the offer, she said, but I'm not for sale. She glanced pointedly at the door. I think we're done. The fiancé's hand clenched around her coffee cup. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. At last, she slipped the envelope back into her bag and rose to leave. You're digging your own grave, she said, voice low. And potentially your babies, too. Ashley forced herself not to recoil. I'll find another way, she whispered, choking down the knot in her throat. She watched the fiancé stride out of the cafe, head held high, coat flaring behind her. The meeting had rattled Ashley more than she cared to admit. She stared at the untouched coffee, her appetite gone. A spark of mingled rage and sorrow tightened her chest. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She half expected it to be another threat from some unknown number, but it was the hospital again. Her mother's health had taken a turn for the worse. Anxiety surged, and she pushed away from the table, hurrying outside. The sky had grown dark, clouds heavy with an approaching storm. Tanya immediately jumped out of the car, sensing the tension. "What happened?" she asked, eyes darting to Ashley's pale face. Ashley shook her head, voice thick. "She tried to buy me off. My mom's in trouble now. I have to go." They drove to the hospital in near silence, Ashley's mind a hurricane of conflicting emotions. When they arrived, she rushed through the corridors, following the nurse's direction to her mother's room in the ICU. The sight of her mother, pale and hooked to more machines than before, made Ashley's heart clench with fear. A doctor approached, explaining they were trying a new treatment, that the bills would increase yet again. Ashley nodded numbly, fighting tears, thinking of the envelope she'd refused. Night fell, and Tanya eventually went home. Ashley stayed by her mother's side, staring at the monitors, hearing the rhythmic beep that reminded her how precarious life was. Though exhaustion tugged at her, she refused to close her eyes. She pressed her hand gently to her own stomach. "I'll find another way," she told herself, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She left the ICU in the early hours, dragging her feet down the hall. As she neared the exit, her phone vibrated, another unknown text. She felt her pulse jump at the sight of it. "He's not untouchable. I know how to prove it." Her heart quickened and she stared down at the phone, breath catching in her throat. Suddenly a flicker of hope sparked in the darkness surrounding her. Ashley looks at her phone, then at her mother lying unconscious. She tightens her grip on the phone and whispers, "I'll find another way, Mom. I promise." Ashley stood in the hospital corridor, the faint smell of antiseptic mingling with the distant hum of machines. Her phone still displayed the cryptic message from the anonymous ally. "He's not untouchable. I know how to prove it." She reread it multiple times, her mind racing with questions. Could this be the missing piece she needed to corner Travis for good? She slid the phone into her coat pocket and stepped back into her mother's room. The lights were dimmed low, and a gentle beep announced the flow of IV fluids. Her mother looked frailer than ever, the lines around her eyes and mouth etched deeper with each passing day. Ashley sank into the chair by the bed, brushing a hand softly over her mother's hair. There was no response. The medication kept her sedated. Still, Ashley spoke in hushed tones, updating her on everything that had happened, as if her mother could hear each word. Minutes ticked by. Finally, she stood, placing a protective hand over her abdomen. A flicker of movement reminded her that her unborn children were depending on her. A renewed sense of determination surged through her veins. She needed to find out what this ally knew about Travis's business and how to use it to force his hand. Outside, a cold evening settled over the parking lot. Tanya waited in the car, posture tense. Ashley slid into the passenger seat, exhaling unsteadily. "What's next?" Tanya asked, voice low. "You going to reply to that text?" "I have to," Ashley said, checking her phone. "It's a chance to get evidence that Travis can't just dismiss. If I can prove shady business dealings, maybe I can negotiate with him for an official paternity test. Or something. I just can't keep getting knocked down." They drove to Ashley's apartment in silence. Once inside, Tanya helped her set up a makeshift workstation at the kitchen table, laptop open, a steaming cup of tea at the side. The allies' messages continued popping up, each more mysterious than the last. "There's a trail of financial irregularities," one said. "He's exposed. Look for shell companies," another hinted. Ashley jotted down the details, searching the internet late into the night. The more she dug, the more she found rumors about Travis's company funneling money through shady partnerships overseas. A couple of vague articles had surfaced weeks ago, overshadowed by more sensational headlines about his personal life. But now, piecing them together, Ashley saw patterns. Timelines matched suspicious transactions. She felt her pulse race with every new thread she uncovered. Tanya yawned, massaging her stiff neck. "This is heavy stuff," she murmured, glancing at Ashley's screen. "You really think it'll force Travis to listen?" Ashley rubbed her eyes, exhaustion pressing on her temples. If these allegations are real, the scandal could tank his entire company. He'd have to come to the table or risk total ruin. Then we push forward. Tanya squeezed Ashley's shoulder. "Get some sleep. I'll print these articles and highlight key points." But Ashley couldn't sleep. Not yet. Images of hospital bills and ultrasound scans flooded her mind. Her mother's fragile condition weighed on her heart, and the triplets, 3 tiny, precious lives, depended on her winning this battle. She refused to let them be erased by Travis's indifference or his fiancé's threats. Eventually, she dozed off with her head on the table, dreams full of swirling spreadsheets and cryptic text messages. Morning brought a gray sky and a renewed flurry of phone calls. One, from a pro bono law group that Tanya had contacted on Ashley's behalf, jolted her fully awake. The young attorney on the other end introduced herself as Brianna, speaking with a warmth that immediately soothed some of Ashley's unease. "I've looked at your situation," Brianna said gently. "I believe we can help you file for a paternity test and protective measures, so you're not silenced by threats. It won't be easy, especially if Travis hires a high-powered legal team, but I'm willing to try if you are." Ashley's cheeks heated with tears she tried to hold back. "Thank you," she managed. "I don't have the money to—" "That's why I work pro bono," Brianna interrupted, a slight smile in her tone. "Justice shouldn't be limited to those who can afford it. I can't promise a miracle, but I'll do everything I can." Relief made Ashley's eyes prick. She agreed to meet Brianna later that week, feeling a spark of hope. If she had an official legal partner, perhaps Travis's intimidation wouldn't crush her so easily. She texted Tanya the good news, then carefully packed her notes about the shady business deals, planning to show them to Brianna as well. Meanwhile, rumors swirled online that Travis's corporation was under a minor investigation, something about unusual wire transfers flagged by regulators. Although no official charges had surfaced, the business world was abuzz with speculation. Ashley's phone kept lighting up with messages from the anonymous ally, urging her to keep digging. "His empire is a house of cards," one message read. "Hit it at the right spot, and it all collapses." That afternoon, she visited her mother at the hospital again. To her surprise, her mother was awake, eyes half-lidded but lucid enough to recognize Ashley's voice. Ashley rushed forward, emotion welling up like a tidal wave. Gently, she explained the baby news. Triplets. Tears glistened in her mother's eyes, and she squeezed Ashley's hand, though she was too weak to say much. "It's going to be okay," Ashley whispered, trying to convince herself too. "I have a lawyer now. We're going to get the truth out." Her mother's lips moved, forming a barely audible reply that Ashley interpreted as a blessing or an apology. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of her. After a few minutes, her mother drifted back to sleep. Ashley kissed her forehead, heart weighed down by both sorrow and love. When she stepped into the hallway, her phone dinged with a new message, this time from Travis's lawyer. The text was blunt. "Ms. Pierce, we have evidence of your continued defamation. Cease or face legal repercussions." Ashley's hands trembled. She leaned against the wall, recalling the fiancé's threats that they'd bury her. But she wasn't alone anymore. She'd show this to Brianna and keep pushing forward. That evening, Ashley and Tanya met with Brianna in a modest law office on the outskirts of town. The small space smelled faintly of old furniture, but there was a sense of quiet determination in the air. Brianna welcomed them into a cluttered conference room where shelves brimmed with law books and case files. Ashley laid out her evidence. the ultrasound images, her hospital records, and screenshots of texts from Travis's side that threatened her. Then she showed Brianna the new leads on Travis's potentially illegal business deals, though she admitted they were mostly rumors and partial data. Brianna flipped through everything, eyes sharp and focused. "This is quite a mountain you're climbing," the lawyer said, tapping a pen against the ultrasound photos. "But if these deals are real and you can connect them back to Travis, that might be leverage to force him into a paternity test without dragging it out in court forever. A scandal like that could damage his reputation more than your pregnancy claim." Ashley nodded. A flicker of resolve sparked in her chest. "I'll keep following the leads. And you'll proceed with the official suit?" Brianna gave a calm smile. "Yes. I'll file a motion for paternity testing this week and request an injunction against any defamation suits from Travis's camp. It'll be an uphill battle, but we have a shot." Hope and fear warred within Ashley, but she felt a sense of direction for the first time in ages. "Thank you," she whispered. Late that night, as she scrolled aimlessly through social media, she came across a breaking news bulletin. Rumors of a major corporate scandal involving Travis's company had escalated. A confidential source had leaked partial documents to a journalist, and suddenly Travis was in full damage control mode. Ashley watched a clip of him on TV, pacing behind a podium at a rushed press conference. His hair was disheveled and his eyes looked shadowed with stress. She recognized that tension in the tight line of his jaw. The man who once dismissed her so casually now seemed haunted by bigger demons. Her phone buzzed again. "I told you, he's vulnerable now. Use it." The ally's words made her heart pound. If Travis's empire was toppling, that might be her moment to strike a deal, acknowledge the children, or risk total ruin. She hated the idea of turning it into blackmail, but she had no illusions about how people like Travis operated. Kindness hadn't worked. Maybe a threat to reveal wrongdoing was the only language he understood. She set her phone aside, a wave of guilt washing over her. Had it really come to this? She recalled each humiliating moment, his cruel words, the fiancé's cold bribe, the smear campaign labeling her a con artist. If Travis had shown even a shred of empathy, she wouldn't be here, balancing on the edge of moral compromise. But now, she could see no other path. While she tried to steady her mind enough for sleep, another message lit up her phone. Not from the ally, not from the lawyer or the hospital. The caller ID was blocked. Her heart jumped, half expecting it to be some new threat. She answered cautiously. Static hissed for a moment before a familiar voice spoke, low and urgent. "Ashley," Travis said, tension vibrating in every syllable. "We need to talk. Now." Ashley's phone felt heavy in her hand as she stood by the window, the city lights glinting below like scattered jewels. Travis's voice still echoed in her ears, low, urgent, and very different from his arrogant, dismissive tone at their last confrontation. He'd insisted on meeting, tonight. She wondered if the emerging corporate scandal, the looming paternity test, and the fury of the media had finally stripped away his defenses. A part of her longed to slam the door on him forever, but another part, especially the mother in her, demanded she listen. If he was ready to face the truth, she had to be there. Tanya offered to drive her, but Ashley declined, feeling an odd sense of resolve. She called a rideshare and spent the journey twisting her fingers in her lap, the memory of each humiliating moment flickering through her thoughts. She reminded herself that whatever happened next, it wasn't just about her pride. It was about the 3 tiny lives growing inside her and the slim chance that Travis might choose to be a real father. Headlights slid across the car interior, illuminating her anxious expression. She inhaled slowly, letting the breath out again, steadying her nerves. When she arrived at Travis's towering office complex, she found the building eerily quiet. It was long past normal business hours. The main lobby lights were dimmed, but a single security guard recognized her name on the system. He offered a polite nod, then swiped a key card, waving her toward the private elevator. She stepped in, feeling the elevator's soft hum as it ascended. Her heart thundered with each passing floor. At last, the doors slid open onto a wide corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. Moonlight glowed on the polished floor. In the distance, glass walls revealed a sprawling executive office. Through the transparent panes, Ashley saw a tall figure with his back turned, gazing at the city below. She took slow, measured steps until she stood at the threshold. He turned, eyes dark with exhaustion and something that might have been regret. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice subdued. It was a greeting far removed from the arrogant barbs he'd once hurled. Ashley remained near the doorway, bracing her shoulders. "You said we needed to talk, so talk." He made a gesture inviting her further inside. The space felt impossibly large, modern furniture arranged with care, enormous windows framing the glittering skyline. It struck her that she'd never been here before, in the heart of his empire. Her heart pounded as he nodded toward a chair. She hesitated, then sat, crossing her arms over her chest. Travis paced for a moment, as though gathering words that didn't come easily. "I've made mistakes," he began, each syllable sounding forced. "I let pride, reputation, and other people's expectations take control. I should have listened to you from the start." Ashley watched him warily. Listening now might be too little, too late. The damage is done. People think I'm a liar. My mother's sicker than ever, and you're still engaged. He cut her off with a brief shake of his head. "That engagement is over," he said quietly, a flicker of rawness in his expression. "My fiancée decided she didn't need the headache of my legal troubles or this scandal. Turns out her image meant more than anything else." Ashley's breath caught. "I'm sorry," she said, though she couldn't quite summon sympathy for a woman who'd tried to pay her off. Yet the news that their arrangement was officially broken sparked a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Travis exhaled, slumping into the leather chair behind his imposing desk. "My company's on the brink of disaster. Regulators are sniffing around questionable deals. Investors are spooked. And I keep hearing about you. Everyone's gossiping about the paternity case. It's overshadowed everything." Ashley placed a hand on her stomach. "All I wanted was the truth. For you to stop denying these babies and trying to ruin my life in the process." He stared at her for a moment, then glanced away as if ashamed. "I know, and I'm ready to admit I was wrong." With an unsteady hand, he pulled out a crisp envelope from a desk drawer, sliding it toward her. "Partial DNA tests. My lawyer arranged them in secret, comparing certain markers. The results indicate a very high probability that I'm the father." Ashley's pulse raced. So he had done a test without telling her, probably using some of the medical records he'd dismissed in public. She swallowed, picking up the envelope, scanning the official letter. It wasn't the full legal test, but it was enough to prove the truth to any skeptical observer. Part of her wanted to throw it in his face, furious that he'd hidden it while publicly calling her a liar. But a more powerful wave of relief washed over her. Finally, she had concrete vindication. Travis rubbed his eyes, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "I'm prepared to make this right. I want to cover your medical expenses, your mother's bills, everything. I'll own up to my responsibility publicly." She frowned, remembering all the bribes and hush money offered by his fiancée. "You think throwing money at me will fix what happened?" she asked, voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. He stood and crossed the room to her, stopping a few feet away, as though unsure if he could approach any closer. His expression was contrite. "No, I don't. But it's a start. The children deserve stability. You deserve an apology. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to give you both." Ashley felt her defenses wavering, tears pricking at her eyes despite her efforts to stay composed. She cleared her throat, fighting the storm of emotions swirling within. "Words won't erase the humiliation, or how close I came to losing hope. But—" She paused, meeting his gaze. If you're serious, do more than pay bills. Stand by your children. Don't hide behind lawyers or empty promises. His voice went softer. I will. I promise. They stood there, an awkward stillness crackling between them. Ashley remembered the first moment she'd been drawn to him, his confidence, his sharp intellect, before it had all turned cruel. Now, for the first time since that awful gala, she sensed a flicker of the human being beneath the rich man's armor. A few days later, Travis made good on his pledge. He called a press conference, giving a brief statement on his corporate troubles and also acknowledging personal matters that required honesty. In front of flashing cameras, he confirmed that Ashley was carrying his children. He apologized for how he'd handled the situation, though his voice shook under the onslaught of reporters' questions. Ashley watched from the sidelines with Brianna, her new lawyer, who quietly whispered, "That's one step, Ashley. You've got what you needed." Afterward, Travis found her in the crowd, ignoring paparazzi and board members who tried to tug him away. He asked her quietly if they could talk privately. She nodded, aware of the cameras still trained on them. They ducked behind a curtain into a small lounge. Travis looked worn out, but there was a sense of resolve in him now. "I want to do more than just talk," he said, voice hushed. "Once this corporate mess is settled, I'd like you to help me reshape our company's philanthropic wing. We could sponsor healthcare funds, support families who can't afford treatment. You have the passion for it, and God knows I need someone with real empathy on board." Her jaw slackened, surprise mingling with cautious intrigue. "Are you offering me a job?" He nodded, the smallest smile tilting his lips. "An important one. You'd have the resources to help people like yourself and your mother. It might be a fresh start for both of us." Ashley felt tears welling at the corners of her eyes again, but this time gratitude washed through her. She recalled all the time she'd spent rummaging for temp jobs, fighting for each paycheck. Now, there was a chance to stand on equal footing, to turn her struggles into meaningful change. She nodded slowly. "I'll think about it," she said, voice trembling. "But thank you." He reached out gently, as though wanting to place a hand on her arm. She let him, neither pulling away nor leaning closer. The past couldn't be erased in a single press conference, but a cautious pathway had opened between them. Days melted into weeks. Ashley's mother received top-quality care, the mounting bills no longer crushing Ashley under their weight. Travis's business woes continued, but with his grudging cooperation, investigators traced the shady deals back to rogue partners. An overhaul began, and the scandal that could have ended his empire began to transform it instead, slowly, uncertainly, but in the right direction. Ashley watched it all with a mix of relief and lingering caution. She spent more time at the hospital, staying by her mother's side, feeling the flutters of life in her belly intensify. Whenever Travis called, she answered, no longer consumed with dread. Sometimes he'd talk about the philanthropic plans. Other times he'd simply ask how she was feeling. She told him the truth, nervous, hopeful, and determined not to settle for less than respect. At last, the day arrived for another major ultrasound, checking on the triplets' progress. She invited Travis to join, heart in her throat as she waited for him in the quiet waiting room. He showed up on time, carrying a small bouquet of flowers, an awkward, earnest gesture she couldn't help but smile at. As the sonographer moved the probe across her belly, the screen lit up with 3 small, flickering heartbeats. She glanced over at Travis, noticing the way his eyes widened, awe and anxiety swirling in them. After the appointment, they stepped into the hallway. He turned to her, voice subdued. "Thank you for letting me be here." She offered a nod, hugging the printed ultrasound images against her chest. "They should know you. Whether we're together or not, they deserve that." He swallowed hard, running a hand through his hair. "I'm going to do better. I promise." In that moment, Ashley realized how far she'd come, from humiliation and desperation to a place of cautious hope. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a start they both needed. Later that evening, as her mother dozed peacefully in a private hospital room, no longer the cramped, understaffed wing she'd been in before, Ashley stepped outside to breathe in the cool night air. Tanya texted, asking for an update, and Ashley sent back a grateful, short reply. "We're good. Getting there." She looked at the hallway where so many twists and turns had led her, from heartbreak and scorn to a newfound sense of possibility. The memory of paparazzi flashes and tabloids mocking her felt distant, replaced by the steady hum of hospital machinery that now symbolized care and hope instead of crushing debt. Standing outside the hospital room, Ashley smiles softly, recalling all the humiliation and hurdles she overcame. She whispers to herself, "I'm done being stepped on. From here on, we rise." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.